Hello, hello. It's Dr. T here tonight on Wednesday for Q&A, and we are going to talk egg freezing tonight. Now, the appropriate term to actually use is oocyte cryopreservation, but just because we're talking to each other and we're on the couch, well, sort of. I'm actually not on the couch tonight. I'm at my desk, but I want to show you my kids are on my couch. They're using my couch tonight. So you got me at my desk. How are you? I hope everybody is really well this wonderful Wednesday night. It's getting chilly over here in Perth. Anyone else having to pull out the winter woolies to go to work? I hope so. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about egg freezing. Now, I've had a few questions come through, but I know there are so many more questions out there about egg freezing. So if you do have any others, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. But I'm going to actually go through some of the things that I talk to young women about when, I bet it's cold in Melbourne. Cold and you guys are stuck inside. My heart goes out to you, seriously, honestly. It really does to you guys in Melbourne. Sending you lots of love and hugs. Egg freezing. Let's talk about it. Coming into winter, egg freezing. Perfect topic. Okay, so one question that I was asked is egg freezing an option available to any woman, or is medical permission required? Okay, so big topic, and I'm going to try and keep it as simple to understand as I possibly can. There are many different reasons why women choose to cryopreserve or freeze their oocytes or eggs. And we kind of group them into two main groups. The first group is the medical reasons. So these are when women are perhaps about to commence on chemotherapy treatment. We know that chemotherapy for cancer, any type of cancer and any type of chemo, but some particular types of chemo can significantly reduce the egg reserve, how many eggs you got left in your ovaries. And that can be a problem if you're already, say, in your mid-30s or even in your early 30s, and you're about to embark on chemotherapy and your egg reserve is kind of already somewhat depleted. And so what chemotherapy can do is drop it even further, and in some women it can completely eradicate the rest of their ovarian reserve such that they come out the back of chemotherapy treatment sterile with no eggs left and go into what we call a premature menopause. So that's no good. Some other women who choose to freeze their eggs for medical purposes, it might be that they're about to have major surgery, say for endometriosis. Perhaps they have a big endometrioma, big chocolate cyst on their ovary, and the surgery itself plus the cyst itself can destroy the ovarian reserve, and so they might not be left with very many afterwards, so they choose to freeze their eggs. So there's medical reasons, women who have medical conditions that lead them to decide to freeze their eggs. It could be that a young woman has been through cancer treatment and she's in her 20s, for example, and her egg reserve is really low for a woman in her 20s. And so she chooses to freeze her eggs to then use later in life because she's got a significantly contracted reproductive potential. So again, medical. So there's medical reasons. And I'm sure you guys know of other women who might have frozen their eggs for medical reasons. Then there is, well, I don't love the term, but it's the social reason, the elective reason. Let's call it the elective reason why a woman might choose to freeze her eggs. And that might be because she is about to embark on a career that doesn't necessarily allow her to have a family. Now, there's ethical challenges with that alone, isn't there? So, but some women make that decision, and women have the right, women should have the right, I believe, the autonomy to have choice in her reproductive future and when. So it might not be that she is at the time in her life where she necessarily wants to or can proceed with a family. It might be that she just has not met Mr. Wonderful yet. And so we know, and I've harped on about this enough, we know that as a woman gets older, both the quality and the quantity of her eggs decline. And we do know that by the mid-30s that you can start to compromise fertility. And so a woman may choose slightly earlier in her life to not be in that position where she's run out of eggs or the quality of the eggs that she has left is poor. So she may choose to freeze her eggs. And this is considered elective. So there are these fairly distinct groups that women fall into. So in answer to the question, do I need to obtain permission to freeze my eggs? Well, somebody's got to do the actual procedure. So you need to sit down with a fertility specialist and decide whether or not it's actually possible to move forward with egg freezing. But as far as permission goes, well, if you're freezing for medical or you're freezing for elective purposes, you as a woman can obtain that, and you can obtain that service fairly easily now in all states. I want to say all states of Australia and globally, because oocyte cryopreservation or egg freezing is considered an acceptable form of fertility preservation. It is now proven in science, evidence-based medicine, that it actually helps women to improve their chances of having a baby later on in life for whatever reason. It was about 20 years ago, in fact, and here I am, I'm getting on my soapbox now. It was about 20 years ago, in fact, that the Italians discovered that if they froze an egg and then thawed it out, it would behave as well as if it were actually fresh. And the process that the majority of fertility clinics use now is something called vitrification, which is kind of like snap freezing the eggs. But not only that, they found that if you froze it and then thawed it again, but thawed it a few years down the track, it would actually behave with the same ability to fertilize and create a pregnancy as it would have been fresh from the years before when it was actually collected. So when they made these discoveries that freezing and thawing was okay, and you can freeze and thaw several years later and it would behave like a much younger egg, all of a sudden it opened up this potential for women to have choice, to have that reproductive autonomy to say when and how they were actually going to proceed with having a family. And I think that it's amazing that women now have the access to this. Now, perhaps not really answering the question, but maybe in a roundabout way addressing what the real question is financially. If it is being done for medical purposes, where we know whatever medical treatment someone is going through is going to significantly compromise their ability to have a family in the future, compromise their reproductive potential, it is covered under Medicare. If it is for an elective purpose, it is not covered by Medicare. So the woman bears the full brunt of the cost. Now, do I think that's right or not? It's not for me to say. It requires beautiful young women like yourselves to advocate for elective oocyte cryopreservation, because there are so many ethical reasons as to why women should be able to maintain their choice all the way throughout their life. And so I definitely think as more and more young women advocate for reproductive choice and autonomy, then in the future this is something that will certainly be considered. But there are those two distinct groups, and it's really important for you to be clear on that. So hopefully that kind of in a way answers that question. This is one I get asked all of the time. Are there benefits, or what are the benefits of freezing embryos over eggs? In fact, the way I often get asked this question is, Doc, aren't I better to freeze embryos than freeze eggs? Well, the first thing is I think you're comparing apples and pears. I'd love to say, yes, it's better to freeze embryos, but not everybody is in the position to be able to freeze embryos. Not everybody has couple of straws of sperm that we can fertilize an egg and freeze embryos. So in effect, you're actually comparing apples and pears in this situation. You can't really compare the effectiveness of freezing an egg versus the effectiveness of freezing an embryo. They're two completely different things. But what you need to think about is the fact that eventually an egg, which is a really large cell and has to move large amounts of fluid in order to be able to freeze it, is going to be fertilized, carry along in its development, and ultimately create a blastocyst, an embryo that might have 100 cells in it. That's a very different entity, because when you're freezing an embryo, you've already taken the male into account. You've already taken the ability of that egg to fertilize and move through those 5 days of development into account. And we already know that from one egg to developing an embryo, there's a big journey for that egg to go. So you can't really compare an egg to an embryo. But we do know that in order to get a live birth, you're going to need to freeze way more eggs to create embryos that will ultimately give us a live birth. So whereas you might freeze 15 eggs in order to give you a 70 to 80% chance of a live birth, you might only have to freeze 3 or even 4 embryos. And this is depending on a lot of factors, but I'm just using it as a hypothetical. So I don't really think you can compare the two, but I think it's important to understand that you are going to need to freeze a lot more eggs in order to get a live birth. And we can't even really guarantee you a live birth. The data that is out there, and it is all international data, there is no Australian data on this. It's also based on a very varied group of women who are freezing for cancer, women who are freezing for social, women who are freezing for donation, women who are freezing for lots of different reasons. And they've come up with these statistics. And the statistics are, if you freeze about 15 eggs, and they have to be mature eggs, so there's a difference in what you collect and what you freeze. If you freeze about 15 eggs, you're going to give yourself about a 70 to 80% chance of one live birth. So you see, there's an attrition from the eggs down to the embryos, down to the live birth. So it's really important to think about that. How many stimulated cycles are you going to have to go through to get those 15 eggs is dependent completely on what your egg reserve is. And we measure egg reserve by things like the AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, or even an antral follicle count on an ultrasound. So I'm hoping that in a roundabout way addresses that question, because it's a really common one that is actually asked. How long can eggs freeze for? What a great question. The standard amount of time that we will vitrify oocytes or freeze eggs for is around about 10 years. When you dig deep into the data, what it actually suggests is that your best pregnancy rates from a frozen egg are about 3 to 4 years after they've been frozen. You have to use ICSI. That's where we take a sperm and we inject it into the egg. You have to use ICSI to fertilize eggs. And the reason for that is when you freeze them, the shell around the outside becomes really, really firm, like the shell of a hen's egg, for example. And if you just did IVF, and IVF is where you put an egg in a petri dish and you surround it with about 100,000 sperm, the best one wins. If you did that, then fertilization wouldn't happen, and all that work that you put into freezing those eggs would be for naught. And so we use ICSI, where you take one sperm, a good-looking sperm, and a sperm that moves well forward, and we immobilize it, chop its tail, and then we suck it up into a little pipette, and then we inject it into the egg itself. That's ICSI treatment. So all the research suggests that the best pregnancy rates are probably after those eggs have been frozen for about 3 to 4 years. They can be frozen for longer, and you can still attain good pregnancy rates with eggs that have been frozen for a lot longer. But when you're looking at peak fertility rates, peak fertilization rates, and implantation rates, then it seems about that 3 to 4 years after they've been frozen is the best. So then you don't really want to be freezing your eggs in your late 20s if you're planning to use them in your late 30s. And I think it's really important for people to be mindful about this. What is the cost usage? If you're going to freeze your eggs, when is the best time to be doing that? I'm sure this is quite controversial, and I'm going to throw it out there, I suppose, as a little bit of an opinion, but based on evidence. I believe that the sweet spot for freezing eggs is around 34 to 36 years of age, maybe 33. I do not think women in their late 20s, unless they have a really compromised egg reserve or egg count, I do not think that young women should be encouraged to freeze their eggs in their late 20s. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. It's not without risk. We know that young women who undergo controlled ovarian hyperstimulation, so like that first part of the IVF cycle where we hyperstimulate the ovaries and blow up all those follicles to then go and collect those eggs. We know there's some data, registry-based data, that suggests that there is an increased rate of breast cancer in women having controlled ovarian hyperstimulation under the age of 28. Now, it's like extremely rare, over 1 in 30,000. So it's extremely rare. But women can develop ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Women have to have an operation, so things can get damaged, bladders, bowels, all sorts of things. And it's a big investment. It's an investment of time, of emotion, of energy, of money in order to freeze eggs. And I think you want to, kind of like insurance, health insurance, you kind of want to get an idea that you're actually going to be able to use these. And if you freeze them really early and never use them, was that a good investment? I don't know. I suppose it's up to you to decide. Most older women, then sort of older than 36, 37, 38, they might just go straight to IVF when they meet Mr. Wonderful. So the sweet spot from a cost usage, if I go through this, am I likely to use them, is probably that 34 to 36 years of age. Admittedly, all this data is based on international databases, not on Australian. I look forward to some of this information coming out of Australia in the next decade or so. But if you have a good egg reserve, I think really thinking things through from your early 30s and maybe considering it 33, 34 is probably a good idea. Someone else asked a question. Does that 3 to 4 year time frame still apply for frozen embryos? No, that data is different. Again, you can't really compare apples and pears. So frozen eggs, frozen embryos, completely different kettle of fish. So, and the thing about frozen embryos, I just say this is probably digressing a bit, but the thing about frozen embryos is that there's actually a mandate that at 10 years, the regulatory body, wherever you are in Australia, I can really only talk for Perth, but at 10 years, someone's going to come knocking on your door and say, do you still really want these? Because you've reached your limits. You've reached the limits that we are supposed to be freezing embryos. So I think that we don't necessarily have that mandate over gametes, which is eggs and sperm. We know babies have been born from eggs frozen beyond 20 years. And we know babies have been born from sperm frozen from beyond 25 years. So we know physiologically it's possible, but from a guideline point of view, it's different. What is a good egg reserve at 32? Oh, goodness me. So we would base this on an AMH or an antral follicle count done on an ultrasound. Now, there's a couple of caveats that I want to put in here, Mrs. English Lady. The first thing is that I know a lot of young women come to see me and they've had their AMH tested whilst they're on the contraceptive pill, the combined oral contraceptive pill. Now, the combined oral contraceptive pill will falsely lower your AMH, which ultimately increases your anxiety level. So make sure that it's been at least 3 months off the combined oral contraceptive pill before you get your AMH taken. So we often use the AMH. There are some populations where the AMH is probably not as discriminative, particularly in women who have what we call hypothalamic suppression. So their menstrual cycles have suppressed and the ovarian axis is quite quiet. Those follicles are so small that they're not really producing AMH. And so again, there's this falsely low level of AMH. So we'll often then revert to an antral follicle count. That's counting how many little follicles of a certain size, the antral follicle size, are on the ovaries. So you want to go to a really good sonologist, someone who scans pelvises all day, every day as a job for them to count your antral follicles, because it's the follicles of a certain size that you want to count. So in a roundabout way, answering your question, what is a good egg reserve at 32? You want the AMH to be sitting at around the 50th centile, so average. You want to be average in this situation. And I would say at 32, because there's quite a wide range, I would say that double figures would be your expectation. So, you'd want it to be sitting around 12, 13, 14, 15 picomoles per litre. If it's in single figures, I'd probably then go and back that up with an antral follicle count with an ultrasound. And, if at 32 I'm seeing sort of 6 to 10 antral follicles on each ovary, I'm pretty reassured by that. So you should be too. Now remember, the other thing too, this is important to say this. Your egg reserve is not a measure of your ability to conceive. Just think about that for a second, because a lot of women will go and get their AMH tested or go and get their antral follicle count read, and they'll panic. Oh my God, my antral follicle count's really low. I've only got 2 follicles on both ovaries. Yeah, okay, that's a challenge, particularly if you're in your early 30s. So you could still go out tomorrow, have unprotected sexual intercourse, and fall pregnant, even with a low AMH. A low AMH, a low ovarian reserve, is not a measure of your ability to conceive. It's not a measure of your fertility. It's just really a measure of how much time you have left. Okay? Because if you've got a lower AMH, you will go through a menopause earlier than other women of your age. Okay? So hopefully that's clarified that. And look, if there are any more questions, that was it. I was expecting way more questions. I've actually thrown in a few more of my own there that I often get when I'm sitting in consultations around egg freezing. Someone asked about the cost. It's really clinic dependent what the cost is. The cost is about the science, the embryology. The scientists are amazing, and they do the majority of the work. So it really is the cost of the science in whatever particular laboratory that you go to. But of course, as I've said, if it is medically indicated, then there is a Medicare rebate on that. So I can't really give you the exact figure. And that was it. They were all the questions. So if there are any more while I'm on here, I'll give you 30 more seconds. If there are any more questions about egg freezing, or the correct terminology is oocyte cryopreservation, then I would be super happy to answer them. Other than that, I want to wish you guys an amazing rest of your week. If you are over here in WA, then you've got a long weekend. Some of you have got an extra long weekend. Kids off school on Friday as well. Hope you enjoy it. I think it's going to be raining over here. To those of my friends in Melbourne who have just had their lockdown extended, my heart extends to you, sending you so much love. Think of this as an opportunity to, reflect, get good at something completely different, change something in your life. Think about that silver lining to this opportunity as much as you can. Stay healthy, do exercise, eat well, lots of fruits and vegetables, drink water, sleep well, do some mindfulness, and take care of yourselves. And if you think that this has been really valuable for anyone else that you know, then please don't hesitate to share it with them. My mission is to inspire and empower as many women as I can. Oh, Mrs. English Lady, question about Puregon injection compared to gonal F, IUI or IVF. What is the difference? Absolutely nothing, my friend. They're head-to-head, gonal F, Puregon. They're both just brand names for recombinant FSH. Neither of them is going to be better than the other with regards to stimulating the ovaries. So hopefully that's a quick, short answer, whether you're doing IUI or IVF. All right, ladies, if there are any blokes, have a beautiful rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.